Hello, everyone. Today we have a professor of anthropology as our guest speaker, Dr. Stephen Lyon. Dr. Steve is the inaugural Dean of Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the Aga Khan University, AKU. The link to his works will be given in the YouTube description. There are two prominent objectives of today's session. First, Dr. Steve is going to inform us about the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Basically, we are interested in its importance for Pakistan and the world. Is there any need for such an endeavor? Who are the competitors of AKU in this regard, and so on? Our second objective revolves around Dr. Steve's 2019 book entitled Political Kinship in Pakistan, Dissent, Marriage, and Government Stability. When I started reading that book, I kept seeing many parallels between his book and Anatol Lieven's 2011 book, Pakistan, a Hard Country. We are going to talk about that as well in today's session. Dr. Steve, we welcome you to our Fiction Book Club. Please inform us about the need for Faculty of Arts and Sciences and why should people rush to support such a project? Do you see any scope of liberal arts education in an ultra-conservative country like Pakistan?
Thank you. Thank you for such a generous and warm welcome, and thank you for inviting me to be here at all. This is an honor. I think there has always been a need for a kind of liberal arts and sciences education in Pakistan. I think the appetite for it has been there. And when you say an ultra-conservative country, well, yes, I mean, that's there. There is an ultra-conservative aspect to it. But there's also an ultra-liberal Pakistan that is more liberal than anything I have seen in Europe, right? So Pakistan is a land of contrasts. And the liberal arts is one of the few ways I can think that we can actually build bridges between these ultras on all sides. So, you know, when I first lived in Pakistan in the early 80s, it was Zia's time, and public conversations about politics were very muted. People were very careful about saying openly that they liked or they disliked Zia. They did it in their kind of private circles, but they didn't go out in cafes and say it. Now we do all the time, right? It's everywhere. And you started to see that more in the 90s. So open discussion, dissent, not in private, but criticism of the leader, of the government, of the state, all of that is now much more available, and not just on the right, right? So the ultra-conservatives, they're critical. The ultra-liberals are conservative. Actually, the dead centers are pretty conservative. One of my old school friends, he's a businessman in Lahore. He does nothing but bitch about the government. And he's not a revolutionary at all. He doesn't like the fact that he thinks he's the only one paying taxes in the country. He's fed up with his electric bill, all of these things. And he says it openly on social media. He says it quite prominently. And to my mind, that's actually a positive sign. That shows that Pakistan is more mature than it was in the 80s, that the state, however fragile it might be, understands that people have the need to complain and the right to complain. Now, why do we need an arts and sciences education? Because we do have some very solid social sciences, humanities programs all around the country. They're all there. We have some very, very good sciences programs. I think what we need to do is bring these together, because I'm an anthropologist, and as a cultural anthropologist, I lean towards more of the social sciences, humanities side. But I have benefited so much from a solid understanding of nutrition, of physiology, of evolution, of molecular cell biology. These things actually inform my humanities. They inform my social sciences. So I cannot go into I was part of a project years ago, and I got approached by someone who was from the Human Genome Diversity Project. And the Human Genome Diversity Project, this incredible global thing, was trying to trace the flows of people over time. And not just over the last 200 years, which I can do, but over the last 10,000 years, 20,000, 100,000 years. This is a phenomenal exercise. And he wanted to come into my village, this guy, and he said, my village is mostly Gujars. And he said, not my village, the village I work in. I don't own any part of it, but the village that I love and call home in Pakistan. He wanted to come there. It's a lot of Gujars. And he said he wanted to get Gujar DNA. And I said, sure. Yeah, I'm sure they'll be fine. I said, let me explain it to them. Let me talk to them. He said, no, there's no need. We get the army. The army comes in, bangs on the door, gets the cheek swabs and goes. And I said, well, I'm sorry, Yar, that's not possible. I can't unleash the army on this poor little village. These are just normal, nice farmers. They don't need the army. And he said, but it works everywhere else. And I thought, this is why scientists need humanities. They need social sciences, because he's doing great work, right? What he did, the world benefits from, but he's doing it in such a repugnant way that he's likely to go around. This is exactly what feeds into the anti-vaccination movements. It feeds into the mistrust of science movements, because you get, the rumors are that it was a vaccine program that helped identify Osama bin Laden. So now vaccine workers across Pakistan, particularly polio vaccine workers, get killed. So we need to bring these together. I think this is just a no-brainer to me, that scientists must engage with artists and humanities and social science. And also, I don't think that artists without science are going to be able to achieve the changes that they want in the world. So at AKU, we're bringing these together, and all of our students are going to have a fairly good grounding in both the kind of squishy side of arts and humanities and that number crunching, testing, a rigorous controlled process of science. They will understand them both, so that when they get into a situation where they're confronted by a brilliant scientist from the Human Genome Diversity Project, they will be able to help him in a way that I didn't. I said basically, no, you can't have my village, no. And hopefully our graduates will be more successful than me. They will be able to persuade him why it's so important that they engage with people. They take into account culture and politics and economics alongside their science. You said competitors. I like the idea that we have competitors. And I also don't want to be in competition, because I think if, you've got LUMS, you've got Habib, you've got FC College. These are the ones that do something that kind of we call liberal arts. None of them really bring in the science as much as we're going to do, but I think they do, right? So I'm not going to knock any of them. None of them in my book are competitors. I think we all have to succeed. Our competition is ignorance and bigotry. That's what we are all combating, right? We want to get rid of the ignorance. We want to get rid of the bigotry, and not by getting rid of bigots, right? It's not about going after people who hold bigoted views. It's about going after the ideas and helping the bigots understand that the ideas they have are actually not even good for them. The other day I had a conversation with someone, and they trotted out the slogan, women's rights are human rights. And I thought, actually that applies for everyone. So, Shia rights are human rights, Sunni rights are human rights, Khwaja Sarah rights are human rights. Pick your minority that gets picked on. Their rights are our rights, all of us, right? We are all our own brothers and sisters keepers. And that's the kind of liberal arts tagline, headline message that I want to get across the world, that we really are better if we respect and understand each other in humane, sane ways. And when we decide that someone is, evil, and we're just going to break into their home with a hammer and beat them on the head or spray guns at them as they drive past my village, well, actually, those people, they're not only damaging the people they're attacking, they're damaging themselves. This does damage to the attacker as well. And I want them to understand that.
Okay, so one of the unique things that you are going to offer is acting as a bridge between disparate components of liberal arts education in Pakistan. So this is one of the components. This is one of the unique things that you are going to offer. My next question is, what could be the profile of the students and faculty that you are going to hire, and what will it be a 4 years program, 2 years program? So please guide us.
Very good. So excellent questions. It's a 4-year program. 4-year program with a built-in experiential learning component. So our students will be doing things inside the classroom and outside the classroom. It's going to be quite an exciting ride, a bit of a roller coaster. Probably sometimes the students will get a little bit of motion sickness and want to get off, and we'll persuade them to stick it out. And by the end, they'll all be happy. The student profile is at the heart of what we're doing. Everything about AKU from its first day had access built into it. So we are, of course, I'm not going to discriminate against the super elite, right? Those people who have fabulous houses in Clifton and swimming pools and 50 house servants. I mean, all of those people are also welcome, but this university is not for them, right? If they come, then they have to commit to understanding other elements of society. They cannot come and expect to be treated with privilege and to be treated like bade logon, right? They have to come and be ordinary, right? Like me, gaon rene wale. That's what they've got to be. They got to respect the gaon logon as much as the bade logon. And I think we are looking for diversity in our student population. So socioeconomic diversity, of course, gender diversity. I don't think in the 21st century it is viable to have a program that has all of one thing, right? We cannot have all men. We cannot have all women. There's a benefit from bringing people together and having them learn to respect each other. We also want people from different faiths. So we're absolutely open to Christian and Hindu and all of the different wonderful flavors of Islam, Shia, Sunni, Ismaili, Zaidi, all of them. They're all welcome. And we really are interested in really constructing a population, constructing a community. Every cohort will be a community. And my fervent hope is that they become lifelong friends, that they go through the rest of their lives knowing that they are better off because of the all that pain. I certainly went to university with people that I did not like at first, right? They were very different from me. They came from different backgrounds. And by the end of the program, you sort of realize, okay, I still don't like some things about them, but I do appreciate lots of things about them. And we're friends, right? Even if they're not my best friend, we are friends. And if I get in trouble, then I'll call them. And if they get in trouble, I really hope they call me. In fact, I know they do call me. So, we do call each other. In fact, just had a text exchange with one of my old high school friends from Lahore yesterday. And she has very generously put me in touch with someone that I have been needing to know for a long time. So this is a 40-year-old relationship, and she's still helping me out. So that's kind of what we want, not the kind of closed old boy network that reinforces social class, but a very open boys and girls network where we help each other, where we cooperate with each other, because we take that mission about making the world a little bit better than when we found it, and we push that across, and we use our networks to help kind of get that message really out. And the faculty composition, so all of our faculty, I'm in the process of hiring faculty now. They will all have an international profile. So these will be research active people with PhDs. They will be engaged in research themselves. And we are a very student focused program, but students account for about 50% of what the faculty will do. So 50% of their time is related to students. The other 50% is research and other kind of service activities. So outreach, going beyond the university, reaching into consultancy work for the government, for NGOs. So they're going to do all of that. But research is a massive part of what they're going to do. We need our faculty to be publishing in the best international journals with the best international publishers for books, and to show their faces at the literary festivals, literature festivals, at the international conferences, and to play a significant role in advising governments, both in Pakistan and around the world. So I have served as consultant for the British government, for the US government, of course, for the Pakistan government. And this is, I think, part of what academics do. We give our best, honest advice. They usually ignore me, right? That's fine. That's their job. They don't have to pay attention to me, but it is my job to tell them, to the best of my ability, what are the cultural contexts in which they are operating. And that's what I do. And I think that is incumbent on academics to engage with those people who directly impact people in ways that academics really we're kind of at arm's length. So we're looking for excellence at every level, excellent faculty, excellent students. And of course, you see, this is a fake background, but this is my office. This is a picture of my office. So you'll see, if you ever, I don't know if you've been to the Aga Khan University Stadium Road campus, but that is excellent. All from top to bottom, it is a fabulous place to work. I mean, it really is. It would be a great place to study. If I could be an 18-year-old again, this is the university I'd come to.
Wonderful. Actually, I'm an AKU alumni. I completed my PhD in health sciences from Aga Khan University. So I
you
know the work environment as well. Yes.
Yes.
So you mentioned a lot of things. And as far as students are concerned, there will be a 4-year program. And it will also involve field research as well. And one of the major focus is on diversity, socio-economic diversity, race, class, gender, etc. And as far as faculty is concerned, of course, quality is the paramount, but some of the ways you are going to gauge the quality is their exposure. Exposure in terms of their degrees should be from a prestigious institute, and they should be actively engaged in research. Okay.
Yes.
So you have an understanding of our culture as well. So with your permission, should we move on to our second objective about talking about your book?
Aapki marzi. You're the boss.
Okay. So for audience, this is the book that now we are going to talk about: Political Kinship in Pakistan, Dissent, Marriage, and Government Stability. So about that book, my first question is, as far as I understood your marvelous book, one of the key theses is that political rule is always by an elite minority. But in case of Pakistan, kinship or biradari, it provides a parallel institute of power. So I would want you to define kinship and tell me, is it the same as ethnicity or race? What are we missing when we talk about kinship in the context of Pakistan?
That's a really good question. And I wish someone had asked me that question before I'd written the book, because I think I might have added something in the book that would make it better. So kinship, ethnicity, and race clearly impact one another, right? We know they're different, but they're not unrelated. So kinship, what I've sort of focused on here is two aspects of kinship, which is descent kinship. So those people in Biradari lineage, and marriage. We call it alliance. So in anthropology, we have alliance sort of kinship, which is from Levi-Strauss's side, and that structuralism, looking at the bonds between different groups. And we have that kind of descent kinship, which is the sort of father-son, mother-daughter, that sort of descent, depending on whether your lineage is patrilineal, matrilineal, etc. Ethnicity will include kinship, but it's so much more than kinship, because ethnicity would include your language, it would include the kinds of clothing you wear, it would include the food you eat, it would include your religion, might even include your occupation. So ethnicity is a much bigger term, and I think the boundaries of ethnicity are very, very fuzzy. So if we go back to one of the famous anthropologists of Pakistan, Frederick Bart, his analysis of ethnicity and ethnic groups was basically that they are boundary markers. And it's simply a way of saying, I'm in this group and you're in that group. It's not a fixed thing. So the contents inside, Bart says, doesn't matter. So, if I say I wear a particular topi and that makes me a Pathan, well, that topi is kind of irrelevant, except that it signals to other people that I'm a Pathan and I'm not a Chitrali. I'm not a Gilgiti. I'm not a Punjabi. I'm a Pathan because I wear this hat. So the hat, the ethnic marker, is just a boundary. It's a symbol for a boundary. And kinship, I think, is different from that because it's not really marking the boundaries, right? We're not saying I'm a member of this kin group. It's the relations that matter there rather than the symbolic boundaries. Now, race is a minefield. And I think in some ways, we kind of in anthropology, we shied away from it and we started talking about ethnicity because race was just too wrapped up in horrible politics, right? Politics of hatred. But you can't escape race, right? It would be all these people who say, no, I'm colorblind, I'm post-racial. Well, they tend to look like me. They're white people. Black people, I rarely meet a black person who says they're post-racial. I have a Pakistani friend who told me, I assume he was joking. He said he was fed up with being called a colored person, that I am the colored person because in the sun, I turn brown. And sometimes if I'm in too sun, I get too pink. And then if I'm not in the sun, I get really white. I am full of color. He's always one color. He's had enough of this. He's not the person of color and he wants to be post-racial. I'm assuming he's joking, but race is wrapped up in politics. It's very much a sociological phenomenon. And, if you listen to anthropologists like Eric Wolf, it's very much about power politics. That race is, when we invoke race, we are, so we're starting to dredge up power relations between groups. In the US, race is very clearly defined around skin color, right? So if you are darker, you are one race. If you are lighter, you're a different race. I was born in Alabama, and on my birth certificate, it tells the race of my parents. So my mother is white, my father is white, which made me white. That's my race, white. Go figure. Seems like an odd race, but we'll run with it. Now, if any of my ancestors had been other than white, if they had been black, then it doesn't matter what my skin color would be. My birth certificate would have said I had a black parent, therefore I would have been black, because the laws at that time, this law of hypodescent, if you had one drop of quote unquote black blood, you were black. Now, plenty of people who would have been black in that rules passed for white, and then their children become white. So there are many people around the South who will look white and be categorized as white, but by those strict laws of Jim Crow, those segregation laws before the 60s, they would have been classed as black, which meant they couldn't go into certain restaurants, they couldn't sit anywhere they wanted on the bus. There would have been areas of the town they wouldn't have been allowed to live in, jobs they wouldn't get. So race for me is very much about the politics of it. And then I know what you're going to say, Jamshed. You're going to say, but kinship is about politics. You've just written a book called Political Kinship. Yes. So kinship in Pakistan, everywhere you go, as you say, politics is dominated by a small group of people. We're going to call them an elite. But that small group of people, they know each other. They have connections. If you look in the UK, they typically go to Oxford. They do PPE or they do law. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them have been to one of 5 public schools. They go to places like Eton or Marlborough or Westminster. Our current prime minister went to Winchester. They go to these schools where they meet each other. They learn certain patterns of thinking about economics, about culture, about politics. And that really drives British politics in a way that is not that hard to see. You don't have to be a political scientist to see how important the British public school system is here. And kinship, people always go after Biradari politics and how awful they are in Biradari politics. And you wrote that wonderful piece in Dawn about protection, about patronage and having your tribal kind of Biradari clan. If you've got the clan, then you actually have some protection against the precarities of the world. And I think that's absolutely right. I think Biradari really does matter. But Biradari, so I worked in a village where, Biradari is very strong. People talk about their Biradari, they marry within their Biradari, it's a point of pride, all of that. But what I noticed is not all marriages are in Biradari, and those marriages that are outside Biradari actually turn out to be extraordinarily useful, right? Those are the marriages that when you have a really big shock to the system, those are the people that can help you. Because if you're only ever dealing with the people that you are closely related to, well, you have the same network, right? So if you and I are brothers, you and I know the same people. You get in trouble, I can't go to anyone you don't already know. You can already go to them. Whereas if we're brothers-in-law, we don't have the same circles. If you get in trouble, you come to me. I have a different network of people that I can ask favors for that you don't have access to. So it expands those networks really in an incredible way. And people who just let this happen, okay, they're not politicians, right? That's the way most people are. They rely on these networks to help them out, and they don't necessarily think through which networks they need to be tied into. But in that book, I looked at some families that I think do think about marriage in a very strategic way. So, and I don't want to be horrible about these people because I have nothing but admiration. I think this is the survival strategy when you have a state that is weak, when you have a state that is fluctuating, then you have, forces that are beyond the state that can interfere at any time. You have to be ready for really big changes to your system. And so this is, in my mind, this is not something to criticize anyone about. I think the politicians that think, where should I marry my son? I'm going to marry my son into a political family that's in North Punjab, even though I have no connection to North Punjab, but I want a connection to North Punjab. My other son, I'm going to marry to Mianwali, Niazi. I'm going to marry them down there because that's a political family I want to be connected to. And then I'm going to marry another one into the, sort of Okada area, because that's an important area that I want to have some connection. And maybe, so you see Punjabi families tend to marry Punjab and KP. Sindhi families, it's Sindh and Balochistan. So you see why some of these rifts occur within the country, because people aren't marrying each other across these very much. So what we need is for Bilawal to marry, one of Nawaz Sharif's relatives, and we create our little Wata Sata exchange, and we make everyone happy, right? It's not going to happen, right? I'm absolutely not going to predict that at all. But that's the sort of thing that people use on the ground in villages to stop blood feud, to heal rifts. They use marriage strategically. So the premise of the book is, if they're doing this in villages, is it possible that people like Nawaz Sharif or Choudhury Shajat or Parvez Elahi, that they are also thinking about marriage in this way? And I mean, I have to say, we're all praying for Imran Khan's speedy recovery, but his marriages, did he think strategically about his marriage, or was that just pure love? I mean, and I would never cast aspersions at all, but there's no doubt that marriage, his third marriage, has been very beneficial, right? This has tapped him into a very effective, politically powerful family that, has I'm sure benefited. And I stress, I am in no way criticizing anyone for doing this, because if I were born into these families, if I had my children marry who they want to marry, because it's very little consequence to my household. But if my household could collapse on the strength of a bad marriage, then I guarantee you I would be controlling the marriages of my children very, very carefully. So I don't criticize people for this. I simply recognize that there is a political consequence. They may well be marrying for love, but there is a political consequence for the marriage choices they have.
Excellent. So some of the points that you mentioned, you described that kinship is a sort of combination of descent and alliances. And those who want to see what alliances mean and what do you mean by descent, they have to read the book. And ethnicity is a bigger term. It includes, cultural practices, languages, and these things as well. And we tend to shy away from race because it's such a landmine. And I have to make two comments. You talked about Alabama. So my younger daughter was born in Alabama. When I and my wife were there in University of Alabama at Birmingham, we worked for almost 2 years over there. So I have some memories. We stayed in Birmingham, Alabama. So it's a beautiful town.
It is a beautiful town.
Yes. So let's move on and talk about marriage. In chapter 1, page 20. So I'm not going to quote everything, but you talk about marriage provides the foundation for most important political network in Pakistan, and you talked about it as well. Arranging marriages, so it's a coordinated household exercise. So, and also then you move on to talk about, in chapter 2, you talk about kinship lay at the heart of land distribution, political resource competition. And one of the most important obstacles that violent jihadi groups must overcome when winning the hearts and minds of young recruits. So it is a very important point. And Anatol Lieven's book, it also talks about it. So please guide the audience. What is the new thesis that you are offering on top of what Anatol Lieven observed?
So, I mean, I enjoyed Anatol's book, I have to say. I know that many Pakistanis don't like it because it's, particularly if they're on the left, they don't like that kind of admiration he gives to the army. And I admit, I'm a little queasy about aspects of that. I think Anatol is he's further right than I am. I have more faith in democracy than he appears to. But I think Anatol's book he is a journalist who, before he wrote that book, he took me out to lunch, took me out to a very, very nice restaurant in London and spent several hours sort of picking apart my brain. And then I put him in touch with some of the landlords that I've worked with, and he did the same. He went to Islamabad, and I assume he took them out to a very nice meal. And so Anatol is I think he's a very good journalist, right? What Anatol does is he talks to people who he thinks knows stuff. What Anatol hasn't done, and Anatol would not be even remotely offended by me saying this, he's not done the kind of observational field work. He's not gone and connected himself to families. He talks to prominent people. So he knows if he picks the right prominent people, then he gets a fairly accurate view. If he picks the wrong prominent people, then he gets a skewed view. And I think the criticism that Anatol has received, I'll let him defend himself, but the criticism he's received has largely been centered around his choice of informant. So he spent too much time talking to the army, spent too much time in, I don't know what hotel he stayed in, the Marriott, the Serena, whichever nice hotel he stayed in Islamabad. And he talked to, people who had military connections, people who thought that, General Musharraf was the best thing to ever to happen to Pakistan. And he reinforced that. Now, that's an attitude you can find around Pakistan. I used to do this thing. I haven't done it in a long time, but I used to ask people that I met, so to rank the best heads of state of Pakistan, excluding Quaid-e-Azam, because we all have to put him first. But if we exclude him, after that, who's the best leader that Pakistan's ever had? Landlords typically would say, before General Musharraf, they would say Ayub Khan, then they would say Yahya Khan, then they would say Zia, then they would go down to, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was fairly low down the list, right? Land redistribution, not high on their list of good things to do. Peasants would typically say more Bhutto, right? Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, maybe Benazir Bhutto, but it was shocking how many of those landlords really, really believe that Pakistan needs a strong, powerful, authoritarian leader. And then when Musharraf came, he always topped the ranks. He beat out Ayub Khan, right? They loved Musharraf. And I said, and then also I followed that up then with asking, well, why? What is it you like about them? And they would say, but, I remember one of my very best friends, I've known him for a very long time, said to me, Pakistanis are wild humans. They're savage. They're not civilized. They need to be beaten into good behavior. Now, I don't believe that, right? I think that's categorically wrong. But you find that expression, you find that sentiment expressed across the board. And so I think this is where Anatol may have, if he writes a sequel to this book, I hope he talks to people who don't believe that. I'd like him to talk to people who actually have a little more faith that some of the things that look chaotic are actually quite functional, right? That you can have, the National Assembly debates are messy and they don't always result in something that we might like, but that is the process. That's actually, when you've got 220 plus million people, you do not have consensus, right? You will never get consensus. I mean, you're never going to get all 220 million people to agree about anything. I mean, nothing. You will never get agreement. So what we're always working for is compromise. And that's where I think people get frustrated. They see the scale of the problems and they see the pace that compromise can bring about change, and they get frustrated. And they want someone strong. They want some authoritarian who can just not compromise, but implement the change that is required and necessary. Now, in the long run, one of the things I learned from living in a village, in the long run, that doesn't really work. In the long run, it is compromise. And these authoritarian landlords who want someone like Musharraf or Zia, actually, they don't operate that way in their own villages, right? They are not that authoritarian. They act authoritarian, but they're constantly compromising. They recognize, one of them put it to me very, very succinctly. He said, I asked him, a question about some event that had happened. He said, Steve, you got to remember, there's only like 100 of us, the landlords in this village. There's like 6,000 of them. If they ever decide that they don't want us to own the land anymore, in 15 minutes, they can get rid of us, right? So he's very, very aware that you don't, as 100 people, really, it's like 6 men, 10 men that own the majority of the land, though, and then their families, they don't continue to own that land purely by force, that they have to do it with consent. Now, the hierarchies of Punjab mean that consent is hard to see, right? It doesn't look like people are consenting, but then you see what people do and you realize there's no way you could make them do it. They are doing this because somewhere they feel invested enough in this system to reproduce it. And I think that's one of the things that the jihadi discourse is able to tap into is they're able to kind of peel back some of that injustice and say to people, you know, you, your father, your grandfather, your pardada, and so on, all of you have lost out. This promise of you somehow getting equal and getting better life, it's never going to happen in this system. This is never going to happen. And that is a very, you know, that's a stark kind of eye-opener when you realize this system that I have been colluding with is not only hurting me, but it's guaranteeing that my children will never, ever rise above this kind of peasant status that I have lived. And yes, there's lots of joy to be had in life, even if you're very poor, but we aspire for more than that for our children. And I think that's a lot of the turbulence we see now is so much of the kind of underclass of Pakistan has had that eye-opener. They've had that epiphany. They've looked at the world around and said, well, actually, I don't have to be, you know, a peasant anymore. I don't have to be sort of a poor nokri. I could actually be the boss. And when we go through that, that's of course very chaotic and turbulent. I am confident that, you know, a middle class will emerge, and well, a middle class has emerged, but that it will grow and that it has the capacity to kind of offset some of that that real violent resistance to the system. But that does take time. And you know, it's not going to happen by itself. We do have to work to help it along, to provide that kind of opportunities to where people feel invested in the economic and political systems enough that they don't want to blow it up. And you look today, there's so many people in the US, in the UK, in Pakistan, in India, who just want to blow things up and start from scratch. And I think that's where the compromise is so critical. And it's honestly, it's what I learned from the landlords in this little village in Attock district, that you actually have to play the long game. You have to think about everyone being able to win a little bit. Nobody can win everything, and nobody should lose everything. That's critical. When people lose everything, the system becomes very dangerous. I'm not sure if I answered that question properly. I think I just went off on a strange rant. I apologize.
No, just stay there. I agree with you. That's the exact feeling that I got when I was reading Anatol Lieven's book, that his book is rather pro-establishment. And now I'm going to bring you towards another point that you alluded to a little bit. It was his point about negotiated state. Lieven's point is Pakistan is a negotiated state. And you also mentioned that the boundaries between public and private and also national and local, these are contestable and deniable. So right now, currently, the situation that Pakistan is going through, it's about negotiation. If you put enough pressure, then you can attain power. So right now, the party that is doing it, for example, let me just name it, PTI. So right now, it is not, as I see it, it's not based on kinship power. It's about, you know, it's about negotiation. So rather than kinship-based showing power, it is about negotiation. So I want your comments on that, Pakistan as a negotiated state.
I think that's absolutely right. And I would actually go further and say, you know, the sort of Parvez Elahi marriage networks are also about negotiation, right? It's never, marriage is a kind of precondition that gives you the almost the kind of key to approach the door, but you don't get through the door without negotiation. And I think PTI, you know, so, you know, the PTI does break some of these patterns from before, right? It is not straight Biradari politics. It's not straight Shadi politics. This is actually more appealing to some ideologies, right? There is some ideology there. Naya Pakistan was a genuine ideology. It had genuine promise. It was poorly sort of defined. There was a lot of fuzziness, but it had some clear ambitions about an end point. But it still needed a lot of negotiation. So in the 2013 election, I was here for most of the run up to the 2013 election, and I was hanging out in rural Punjab, and the different landlords I was talking to, they were much more divided than they had been in previous elections. Some were backing PPP, some were backing PTI, some were backing Noon League, some were, I mean, Kof League was really quite weak, but those who were actually Kof League were calling themselves independent or this or that, but we knew who they were, right? So I was getting sort of trying to figure out why were people backing the party they backed. There was one guy who was backing PPP, And I said, so what is it you like about the People's Party platform? Do you think they're honest? Do you think they're virtuous? Do you like the secularity of them? And he would listen and listen and listen. And he finally got very angry at me. And he said, just chup kar, shut up. He said, I don't care about their ideology. I don't care about any of that. None of that matters. What I care about is I need this politician to support me in my land dispute against my cousin. That's when he promises to do that, he gets my vote bank, right? And this is one of the landlords that can deliver at least several hundred votes. He'll tell the peasants that work for him, you vote this way, and they will by and large vote the way he tells them to vote. So the negotiation, some of that negotiation is as kind of you're alluding to. It is a high level negotiation around ideas and around persuasion, and something that will be recognizable anywhere in the world. Some of it is also recognizable anywhere in the world. It's the old, what we call in the States, pork barrel politics. It is, scratching the back of local politicians to get them to deliver the vote. And, my epiphany, my eye-opening moment then when he told me this, I suddenly realized across all of Pakistan, there are 1,000 other landlords like my friend who are delivering their vote bank, not based on People's Party's careful, curation of women's rights or PTI's, promotion of a kind of virtuous anti-corruption campaign, or Nawaz Sharif's or Shahbaz Sharif's kind of economic productivity agenda. They don't care about any of that. They care about something very, very parochial. Back in 1999, I remember there was no election then, but I remember following up on the previous election, and the previous election was about getting a digital phone exchange in the area. So they put their weight behind the politician who promised to put a digital phone exchange in the area. Another campaign promise was that they put in a steel metal road, a good road through the village. So very parochial concerns. Now, this is not new, and this is not unique to Pakistan. Freddie Bailey, way back in the late 50s, writing about Orissa politics in India, said it's exactly the same, that people go, they try and get promises from the politicians that are very local, that are about, a road or a well or electricity or a school, and they don't necessarily believe the politicians can deliver it, but that's what they're actually voting on. And I think, Anatol's point about negotiated state, I think that's spot on. I also think that's probably true of most states. You may have some tiny, tiny little countries in Europe where there's something more kind of ideologically pristine going on. But in the real world, politics is all about negotiation, and it's about getting people who actually disagree with each other to come to the same table and agree that for the duration of this parliament or this assembly or this Congress, we will sign up to a particular manifesto. We may not like it all, but we're going to sign up to it and we're going to go along with it. And then, we can see in Britain that falls apart as one prime minister follows another in this rotating system. But basically, it is negotiation. And anyone who thinks that it's got some real ideological purity hasn't been paying attention.
Excellent. Even when the negotiation is based on ideology, they have to strengthen their point of negotiation through kinship. They have to do that. So kinship is, again, a very important foundation of Pakistani politics. Even for the parties like Jamaat Islami and MKM, those are non-dynastic parties, but still at the very deeper level, they have to follow it. So that was
just add one thing. I think that's absolutely right. But one of the things that kinship offers is a non-confrontational opportunity to meet people. So you can meet people at janaza, at shadi, at various family functions. That's not ostensibly political, right? You're not going there to talk politics. You're going there to honor some family event. But you do wind up meeting people who will be on the other side. Now, at the level of the Shahbaz Sharifs and the Imran Khans, I don't know. I don't get invited to those weddings. But at the level of lower landlords, that absolutely happens, right? So I go to weddings in northern Punjab, and you see that there will be people from all the parties there, and they're there because they have a kinship connection, they have a family connection, household connection. And so while they're there, actually, if they're big shots and they're well known, they won't sit next to each other, but you can see people running back and forth between them. You can see that if they want to talk to each other, this is an opportunity to just exchange some non-hostile messages. They can do it outside of the kind of focus of the camera, outside of the focus of social media, and they can have a civil conversation without the glare of all that scrutiny that comes with politics, because you're at a non-threatening event. Which is not to say weddings are political events. They're not. They're family, they're fun, lots of singing, dancing, all of that, good food, but they do give people the opportunity to see each other. And if you go back to Putnam's kind of model of social capital, Putnam's formula for generating social capital starts with people seeing each other physically, right? You get on the bus with people, you see them. And when you've seen them 5 times, you may never have said anything to them, but you kind of feel more connected to them. It's one of the reasons I think public transportation is so important, and why, AKU security will absolutely have a panic attack. But I love public transportation in Pakistan, because you get to see people, you get to connect with people, and people are chatty. They'll leave you alone if you're tired, but it gives you an opportunity to connect to people that you wouldn't ordinarily see when you're sitting in your car with the driver who you already know well, so you don't need more social capital with them. But it gives you that opportunity to develop social capital. And weddings and funerals and all of these family occasions, they give people an opportunity to see each other, even if they're not talking. They start to build up more social capital. Now, you're going to tell me in the realpolitik world, that's just nice, fluffy irrelevance. And to some extent, you'd be right. But I think all of these things feed in, and it's very hard to know how important it is that people know each other personally. All these stories we hear about British Parliament, the people who hate each other in Parliament, they shout at each other, and then we find out they're actually best friends. Like, they hang out in the bar together, they talk to each other, and that goes a long way to helping us understand why British Parliament doesn't wind up with people walking across the aisle and slapping each other and hitting each other, which happens in the Japanese Parliament, we've seen it in the National Assembly, we've seen it in the Indian Assembly. That actually having some personal connection just means you can have a disagreement without it taking that next step to violence. And kinship in Pakistan helps with that. It's part of that package. I also think that Pakistani voters like to know the person that they're voting for. They want to know that this is a good person. Well, how do you judge that the person is good? Because people say, everyone says I'm good, everyone says I'm honest. But if you look at their family, then that gives you a better indication of them. If somebody's like, Pelwan, right? Strong wrestling man, that tells you that Kulsum Begum must be a strong woman, and a strong woman wouldn't marry a useless man, because those wrestlers were powerful people. Nawaz must be a powerful person. It's that association which nobody says out loud, but it's part of the package of information that we all use. Why do we vote for Kennedys in the US, right? I don't know anything about Kennedys. I know John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, but people still will vote for Kennedys because there's an association. Okay, John was a good president. Bobby would have been a good president. So maybe this Kennedy will be good too. And we're all guilty of that. That's not a unique Pakistani phenomenon. And through marriage, we can extend that association so people at least have the illusion they know us better.
Excellent. And what I loved about your work was I didn't find any single example of value judgment. You just mentioned the things as they are based on your 2 decades of research, right, on the ground. So that was something that is remarkable about your book, which I found that Lieven's book, he tends to take some or the other sides. So that is wonderful about your book. So now we are I'm going to ask you questions that our students have brought.
Sure.
So as an anthropologist, have you seen any decline in family values that our elders keep complaining about?
Elders have been complaining about decline in family values, I think, as long as there have been elders. My mother, who I love dearly, lovely woman, she has been bitching and moaning about the decline of humanity for the last 15 years. Before that, she was actually a very positive person. There seems to be something about getting to an age when it's just the change is one step too far. Now, I don't know whether we can call it a decline in family values. There's definitely changes, right? But certainly young Pakistanis seem quite attached to their families. You know, when I talk to them, they seem respectful of their parents. They probably are less obedient than their parents were, but, you know, take that with a grain of salt. Their parents may be remembering more obedience than there actually was. So I'm old enough that I was a youth. I was 16 years old when I first went to Pakistan. I was with those youth who are now elders complaining about the decline in family values. And honestly, I remember those boys. The girls were better behaved, at least as far as I could tell, but the boys were not well behaved, very wild, did all kinds of things that they would be horrified if their sons did. But, you know, this is kind of, it's the pattern, right? There is a time for bitching about decline in family values, and there's a time for railing against the constraints of family and challenging the authority. This is, it seems to me, part of the life cycle of humanity. I haven't seen a really striking decline in family values in Pakistan, but then maybe I've not been looking for it. So maybe if I go looking for it, I'll find it.
Okay, so it was question from Aida from Dow University of Health Sciences. So she got the answer.
It's a good question.
We have one more question from our live stream, and let me read that out. Sir, what do you think about the phenomenon of ethical erosion in sciences, and how can you decrease it, or we decrease it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And I think we have to look at this in different places because it's not a uniform phenomena around the world. I think in some ways, what we've seen in South Asia is a real bolstering of ethical context and ethical constraint on science. Because if you go back to the 90s, pharmaceutical companies could, without any consequences at all, run human trials in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, right? It was cheap. When somebody might die from the experimental drugs, they would give them some very small sum of money and not worry about it. There was no bad press. They cannot get away with that now, right? You couldn't do human trials in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh without going through the same kinds of ethical review that you would have to go through in Europe or the States. So in my mind, that is part of it. Is I think the question, the ethical erosion question, comes from the fact that we're much more aware now of some of the things that science did and some of the things that actually scientists would continue to do if we didn't check them. So we need, it's like those little locks on the suitcases, right? They don't stop thieves, but they keep honest people honest. We need to create the frameworks that keep honest scientists honest. The mad scientist who's going to go clone babies, well, they're going to have to go to North Korea for it. They're going to have to go somewhere where there aren't the checks, because we need to make sure that we have the checks that just keep scientists, remind scientists that they have an ethical and a moral responsibility to not harm people, to not harm the world around them, you know, not to do things that are actually just crazy and damaging, right? Now, ethical erosion, I think, you know, the question may be coming from someone who's got personal knowledge. It may be something that is rooted in some specific example where there has been an incidence of ethical erosion, because there clearly are places where there's been some very odd changes in the constraints on ethical review, because ethical review is not a perfect process. But I think we are moving away from that world where a scientist could just have a great idea and just run with it without having to run it by other people who are independent and ask them, what's the potential harm here? Is the benefit going to be sufficient to outweigh whatever risk there might be to harm? And is the risk going to be so great that whatever the benefit is, we shouldn't do it?
Excellent. Now I'm going to ask you my probably last question. It is about political correctness. Liberal arts university, it should have maximum freedom of expression without insulting anybody, of course.
Sure.
But in your book as well, you at one point you mentioned that calling a group of people mine does not mean I own them, and you did that over here as well. So you seem to be afraid, right? So if you are running a faculty, so what are you so afraid about? So tell me about the dangers of political correctness and how are you going to deal with them in current scenario, and considering the fact that, as you mentioned and as we can see, you are white male. So a lot of times you may be telling the truth, but other people can just shut you down and say, oh, you are just privileged white male. So tell us about political correctness and its harm to the project that you are launching, a wonderful project of Faculty of Arts and Sciences.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very important point. And I think we have to have debate that is uncomfortable. We have to be able to talk about subjects that people find distasteful. This is important. Where I think political correctness is absolutely appropriate is when we have that debate, our goal should not be to offend, right? Our goal should be to clarify, to enlighten, to help people understand. And so, you know, one of the kind of common things that people are getting agitated about now are issues of pronouns, right? So if a student comes to me and says, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, right? And the person in front of me presents very masculine, and I think, oh God, I would not have thought you were a she, her. But actually it doesn't hurt me at all. There's no cost to me at all to using the pronouns that this person has asked me to use. If they ask me to use they, them, I will use those pronouns. So, you know, political correctness where it's right is really it's almost like mehman nawaz, you know, it's hospitality. It's making the person in front of you feel comfortable, making them feel like they belong. And that's really what political correctness for me, where it's right, is that we want everyone in the room to know that they belong there, that they have a place at the table. They're not outsiders. They're not unwelcome. So that's where political correctness is good. Where the political correctness creeps into a kind of a cancel culture, well, you know, I mean, I was a young undergraduate student at one time. I would shout and cancel people. And, you know, there were people that I didn't like. There are people whose views I think are repugnant and awful. And one of the things you get with time is a realization that they may have bad ideas. That doesn't make them bad people, right? They may have ideas that I disagree with rather than bad ideas. They have ideas I disagree with. A friend of mine in northern Punjab, again, I keep going back to this place, he asked me, how can Europeans claim to be standing up for women's rights when they have such high divorce rates, and they have so many homeless young women, and they have so many rapes, and they have so many sexual assaults? How can they claim to be standing up for women's rights when they don't protect women like Pakistanis? And in his village, right, divorce rate is very, very low. Domestic abuse is, you know, it is a problem, but it's something that within the village they kind of check, and they are guided by Quran and Hadith, right? They use that to guide their kind of women's rights. And I, you know, I had to say to him, you're taking the worst of the West and comparing it to the best of Pakistan, which is not fair. But the fact is that we don't have a monopoly on goodness anywhere. And that's what's very important to remember, is we all have something to learn from one another, which is why we have to be willing to listen to those awkward, uncomfortable complaints. So when my best friend tells me that women shouldn't be allowed to go out in public without covering themselves, and I say, well, no, I think that's wrong. And he explains to me why. I start to understand, what is he worried about? And in his world, he's worried about his daughter being targeted for sexual assault. He's very worried about that. And given the context of the area that he lives, that's not an unrealistic worry. My daughter goes to school by herself, and I do not worry about that, because in London, she goes to school in London, that isn't a kind of high priority risk for me. I don't have to live in that world where I'm constantly worried about sexual assault. He does. So this is one of the things I think we need to have that conversation about, things like veiling, about arranged marriages, about aspects of religion. We need to have those conversations, not to tell the other person they're right or they're wrong, but to try and understand, what on earth could make you think this thing that I think is crazy? Why would you think that's right? Why would you think that's a justifiable, righteous thing to say or do? And yeah, I mean, I am also an anthropologist. If you know anything about anthropology, which you do, you will know that the vast majority of anthropologists skew left. Many of them skew much further left than me. Most of them skew much further left than me. So when I say my village, I never have a problem with Pakistanis, right? Pakistanis never give me a hard time about that at all. My brothers and sisters in anthropology jump down my throat and say, what, do you own it? Do you own it? Did you buy it? Did you take over? Are you a neo-colonialist, an imperialist? And, okay, they're partly teasing me, but partly they're serious that they want me to be more mindful of my language. The other day, I was saying something. I was in a seminar and I was talking to a Pakistani and I said, we are now ready to have the debate about things like female biology. We're now ready to have those debates in public. And what I meant was we in Pakistan. And the person sitting next to me wrote a little note to me and said, what do you mean we? Are you a Pakistani? And I thought, well, actually, I so easily slip into the we when I'm talking about Pakistan, which doesn't seem to bother Pakistanis very much, but it does seem to bother non-Pakistanis.
And it relates to the virtue signaling, right? The moral superiority, just by words, not doing anything, right? It doesn't cost me anything, and I can be morally superior to you. So,
well, there is that. Yeah, the social justice warrior. I mean, I'm not going to go down because a lot of the social justice warrior, their motivation is so pure and good, and I don't want to quash it, right? It's like, when a 3-year-old thinks they've cleaned the dishes, you don't want to tell them, sorry, these all have to be washed again. You just praise them and say, wow, good job. So a lot of these kind of 17, 18, 19-year-old Gen Z social justice warriors, I mean, they are the future, right? They will fix the problems, but they don't yet know enough to solve the problem. So I think that's where people like me, we have to mentor, we have to guide, we also have to get out of the way, right? So I have to listen. My daughter and I have an ongoing argument about J.K. Rowling, whether she is transphobic or not. This is clearly a generational divide. She gets furious with me because I kind of understand where J.K. Rowling is coming from. And she is a different generation. So this is, for her, this is a very clear-cut black and white issue. For me, this is a shades of gray issue. And I think the more experience you have with difference, with diversity, with the different kinds of people, the more you realize that, the questions are simply not so simple. Which questions we ask, how we ask them. And we are going to have those debates. You put your finger on it, respect, right? How do we have a difficult conversation about, for example, domestic violence in a way that is respectful? Because there are people who will invoke the Hadith and even the Quran to justify something that other people would say is domestic abuse. Now, how do we bring these people together? How do we help them all understand that we all probably want the same world where people are not abused, where people are not victims of violence, where people do have some control and choice in their lives, regardless of their gender, regardless of their age, regardless of their religion, any of that. We want that. I think most of us want the same world. The tiny number of people who don't want that world, who want to really have a horrible world, well, they're harder to deal with. And political correctness does not address them at all, right? Political correct, they don't care. I'm going to go ahead and name a name. The Steve Bannons of the world, evil human being that he is, does not want a world of peace and tolerance and respect. He wants to blow up the world. He wants a world where people hate each other. And that, to my mind, I'm not sure I have the strength of will or patience to really put up with someone like that. Because what he wants is hatred. And what I want is where we bumble along disagreeing, but respecting each other and not being violent to one another. That's I think, really critical for me. Now, political correctness, yeah, I mean, I am the product of the discipline that I embody. And in that discipline, there is an expectation of a certain amount of political correctness. If it doesn't interfere with the big headline message that I'm trying to say, I will always align myself with the kind of political correct crowd, simply because it doesn't cost me anything. Doesn't, if it makes someone else feel good and I can do it, I'll do it. If it actually interferes with the mission, the AKU mission, the FAS mission, this arts and sciences, liberal arts mission of making the world a better place, then I will always fall on the side of making the world a better place over a kind of a pandering to political correctness.
Excellent. Now, my last two questions One question is by Sadia Mustaqim, who's a pharmacy student and also our important fiction book club member. Her question is, what do you think that we non-political persons as citizens should do better? With, it is a politician's job, but what can we do, right? We don't hold power. So this is her question. And my question is a mandatory question. What are your favorite works of fiction or non-fiction that you would like to recommend? These two questions.
Okay. First question. I think this is really the heart of everything we do in AKU. What can I do? I am not a politician. I'm a dean, so you might think I'm powerful, but actually I'm not that powerful. So what is the most important thing I do? Well, the most important thing I do is I have to live the life of the person that I believe I should be the moral person, and treat the people around me with respect. So whether they are my children, whether they are my spouse, whether they are my house staff, whether they are my driver, whether they are my boss, that I need to treat them with with the respect that they deserve, the respect that I would like to have if the situation was reversed. So I think, when I was trying to understand this concept of is it, people told me that the first thing about is it is controlling yourself, being a good person, being a Sharif Banda. If you can do that, then you can actually do good is it. If you cannot control yourself, you can never do good is it anywhere else in the world. So first and foremost, be the person you know you should be. That's what I would say. So for climate change, for carbon reduction, don't count on governments to tell us how to do it. Figure out yourself. So when I'm in London, I'm mostly in Karachi, but when I'm in London, I cycle to work. I take public transportation. I don't have a car in London at all. When I'm in Karachi, well, I'm sorry, I'm not brave enough to cycle in Karachi, so I do take a car, but I feel guilty about it, right? And where I can, I get someone else to give a lift with me. Okay, so that's what we do ourselves. We be the influence, we be the role model, and always think of ourselves as a role model. I don't know at what point I started to think of myself that way, but I suddenly realized there were people in the world who looked to me as an example. So if I cheat on my taxes, if I cross against the light, if I run red lights, there were people around me, and I'm not just talking about my kids, though definitely my kids are in there, but there were people who look at me and think, oh, well, if Steve can do it, I can do it. So don't be that person, right? Be the person who says, actually, there are rules that I believe in that we should all follow, and I follow them. I just see a message, carpooling here. Yes, carpooling is the answer in Karachi because bicycles are just too dangerous. Oh, wow. Books of fiction. Well, I read George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm back when I was 13, 14 years old, and I think it transformed my life. I have not been the same person since. So I would like every single human being on the planet to read 1984 and Animal Farm. They're good stories. They're well told. They're depressing, but they're well told. But they also have such a powerful political message. And nonfiction books. Well, actually, I read so much nonfiction. I think probably there's it's a toss-up between Noam Chomsky's Manufactured Consent and a much more sort of boring book by Boyd on human evolution and the sort of trajectory. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but it's by William Boyd, and it's about the human history of movement, how humans have moved from the Rift Valley in East Africa, from our early days of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam, and how we have spread across the entire globe in this incredible kind of, we are all diaspora. When we talk about diaspora, Pakistani diaspora in Britain, but we're all African diaspora, right? That's ultimately, we all are one humanity, ek insaniyat, and that to me is a message that we need to push much, much more vigorously than we have done in the past, that we really are so united and so common. Everything about us is so common together that we need to remind ourselves skin color, eye color, hair color, and all of these things are trivial. They're superficial. What unites us is, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution that makes us all rishta, And that's a message that I'd like to get across. I'm not sure that comes across in 1984 or Animal Farm, but definitely in the kind of human genome diversity books. Those definitely reinforce that message.
Excellent. Animal Farm is always my number one book. Whenever somebody says that, okay.
I knew I liked you.
Yeah. So wonderful recommendations. I'm going to mention them in the YouTube description as well. So now I am 100% confident that Faculty of Arts and Sciences is in wonderful hands. I agree with your objectives, and I think they are noble objectives. And I envy the people who would join that project. And if in any way I could be able to help in that project, so you can always contact me. So any
you may
last
regret
words?
that offer, because I am known to come knocking on people's doors.
I'm not going to regret that. I know myself. So there is another izzat. Okay.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Any last words that you would like to say before I conclude this meeting?
I mean, only that I'm really touched and flattered and honored that you would invite me. And that, you mentioned early on the sort of ultra-conservative Pakistan, but I think groups like this are absolute evidence that Pakistan is not easily boiled down to ultra-conservative or anything else, that there is so much debate going on here. And young and old people all, they're not the same people they were 50 years ago, right? This is Naya Pakistan, not in a political sense, but in a cultural sense. It's very diverse, it's very rich, and it's got huge potential.
Thank you so much. And now, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.